Howdy folks, OGB here. Now that Phase 3 has slowed down a little bit, it's time for us to have a chat about Shockadin. In this video, I'll go over what it is and where it comes from, and the pros and cons of the Shockadin build in Season of Discovery. So, where all the recent Shockadin hype actually comes from is a build that existed in the Burning Crusade Classic, where paladins could use the Lamellar PvP set to stack spell power and take a more offensive role in PvP. At the cost of a significant amount of healing, you could empower your Holy Shock and Judgment spells to be able to completely wipe out a low health or weak target at any time whenever you have Avenging Wrath up. This short clip right here perfectly explains what a Shockadin was in the Burning Crusade Classic. If you've been around for a long time, then you already know that some of my first and oldest videos were of me playing Shockadin and helping to popularize this build back then. Outside of your cooldowns, your heals and your damage are both strong enough in PvP to function as a powerful hybrid. So you use your utility until your cooldowns are back up, and then you can attempt another kill shot. In this way, the gameplay was actually very similar to an elemental shaman outside of the need to be in melee range with your target. The Shockadin build died out with Wrath of the Lich King's release, and we never heard about it again really until now in Season of Discovery, where it's beginning to make a comeback. Now, I have played hours and hours of Shockadin in Season of Discovery and used it to do various things. If you've been watching the stuff on this channel, then you already know about my ZF solo videos, the Wild Offerings, etc. So I think there's proof enough that I know what I'm talking about with what this build is good at and what it isn't, and I'm going to start off with what's it good at. You might call me crazy, but the answer is everything. It's not really great at anything, but it's good at everything. It is definitely the Swiss Army knife of Paladin. You can tank, DPS, or heal, you're just not as good as the intended role. You can even do some weird things like heal in a set of strength gear. Wearing your full ret gear and using Art of War and blasting out Holy Shocks is actually some of the most fun that I had while healing in Nomoran. And yes, it's a meme, but I was doing more damage than any other healing paladin in the world when I would run that build, so there's that. The other thing that's really great about the Shockadin build right now is its strength in solo content. And yes, I understand this is an MMO, but you can't always find a group for everything that you need to do, so players like to have the option to go in and try to kill hard quest mobs or dungeon bosses alone. It presents a challenge for people or incentivizes them to spend a little more time playing, maybe even if their friends can't be online at the same time they are. Shockadin's ability to do respectable damage while also healing with no pushback and the sustain from the illumination talent gives it the power to farm both regular mobs and harder elites, and the gameplay is really fun. I've introduced quite a few people to this build and they've all enjoyed it, and I've been in contact with a lot of paladins. These are things that I think going forward should stay in the Season of Discovery Shockadin build. Okay, let's move on to the problems. The first one being that all the good stuff I just described earlier is enabled for Shockadin by using the Retribution gear and the Retribution runes, and not any form of spell power. Or at least, the spell power part of the build just doesn't really function. Sheath of Light and Seal of Martyrdom are so powerful in combination with strength gear and crit gear that there's just no sense in running anything else. It feels bad to do so, and it's embarrassing to say the least. I put the time in, I collected the spell power set, I ran it in raid for 2 bosses, 99 both of them, top world ranks, and when I compare it to my ret DPS, it is like less than half. It's not even close. Blizzard, if you're watching this, This Shockadin thing desperately needs a huge overhaul or DPS boost to ever be viable. It's way off right now. And when I see this data mine stuff of the Lawbringer set with the cringe holy damage only stat on it, it really makes me feel worried about the future of the build. What I noticed while running it was that mechanically it is online and functional. You can reach the crit threshold that's necessary to run Infusion and get enough Art of War resets, especially now with the changes to Seal of Righteousness that allow it to crit and trigger Art of War. One side effect of this is actually that things like Fiery Weapon or the effect on the Electrocutioner's Needle that does spell damage also procs Art of War. So I guess all spell melee crits, if that's a term, will proc Art of War now. The damage, unfortunately, is just way too low. And the group buff, Horn of Lordaeron, is actually really good right now, and everybody should want it, but it's such a DPS loss for the Paladin, as well as the loss of the mana regen for the raid, you'll never see anyone use it. Even though when you compare it to things like Improved Might, the strength and agility after raid buffs and kings, they far outweigh the attack power from Might. It's nearly the same attack power, and it's like 3% extra crit. There's just not even a question between the two buffs. And then as a Paladin, you're double dipping because of the Wrath rune on that extra melee crit. So, call me crazy, but Horn is actually an incredible buff, and it's really unfortunate that we basically can't use it. And that leads me directly into the second huge problem that Shockadin has, which is it exists in a group buff meta, and it's gotta be the most group buff hungry build in existence. I mean, it benefits from practically everything. Unfortunately, even as a spell power based build, it still benefits the most from the melee group buffs because of things like the Wrath rune and Art of War. And then the silliest part is that you need there to be a Ret in that group with you to give you his holy damage aura. I think we've already seen with the addition of melee hunters that those groups are overcrowded and the spots are coveted. Trying to squeeze Shockadin into this already packed melee meta just seems like a bad idea. And speaking of bad ideas, now I'm going to talk about what I would like to see the spell power build turn into going forward. So the first two things I believe are pretty much no-brainers. Infusion of Light needs some sort of intellect to spell power conversion, and Horn of Lordaeron needs to be raid-wide and probably also needs to restore a good deal of mana in order to compete with Seal of Martyrdom. If you plop enough spell power onto this build, it is viable, but in my opinion, I believe it should be slightly reworked into a ranged spell power focused build. And part of the reason for that has to do with Shaman. Currently, the number of raid rolls that a Shaman can fill is actually one more than a Paladin. And what I mean by that is Shaman can tank, they can heal, they can melee DPS, and they can range DPS. Paladin can tank, heal, and melee DPS. I believe Shockadin could fit in as the PvE counterpart of the Elemental Shaman. And realistically, I believe it fits best in that role. So first, we would need a ranged filler spell, and for that I would suggest an addition to the Purifying Power rune to allow the Hammer of Wrath spell to be casted regardless of the HP of the enemy. As a hand rune to replace Crusader Strike, I would love to see Fist of the Heavens as a throwback to Diablo 2, and it could be perfect as like a Flame Strike style ability that applied Consecrate to the target as well. Maybe it could be on like an 8-second cooldown, and when it crits, it also resets the cooldown of Holy Shock. The final part of my fictional build would be an additional foot rune to replace Art of War, and I think for this rune, with the damage stuff kind of taken care of, There should be some added utility, particularly in the form of multiple cleanses. I think that Consecrate, maybe, when cast, should cleanse every ally that is within the area of effect. To be perfectly honest, there's a bunch of other cool things that could be done with this build, and a bunch of other ideas that I have, and other throwbacks to different paladins in other Blizzard games. But, we're already at the 10-minute mark, so I think I'm just going to call it here. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope I earned your subscription. Let me know in the comments what you think should be done with Shockadin, or maybe what your ideas are for how the build should work out at 60. OGB out.